and welcome to week two's feedback video. Today I'm going to be going over each of the group's submissions for stage 2 and providing some answers to some of the questions from the discussion board, and also just giving a few thoughts on the overall quality and types of things that were discussed on the discussion board. So first I wanted to take a look at here are a few questions that one student submitted that I thought were good questions that I just wanted to address briefly, just in case anyone else shared those same questions. Specifically, and this question I have received a few times: how many tiered lessons do you need in your finished project? And that's really up to you. I know that you're professionals, that you are knowledgeable about your students and your class and the content area in which you're teaching. And so I don't want to say you have to have 4 tiered lessons out of 15. I want you to think about when does it make sense to have a tiered lesson, and then do it there. I understand that not every lesson should be or can be tiered, and so I'm going to leave a little flexibility. Of course, I want to see you meet the needs of your high ability students. That's part of the goal of the class, and so if that means you need a tiered lesson to do that, then I expect you to write a tiered lesson. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between differentiation and tiered lessons. And so tiered lessons are specifically differentiation. They are examples of differentiation. So differentiation is your big idea, and tiered lessons is one piece under that big idea. So a tiered lesson actually differentiates most often and specifically in terms of readiness. You have different tiers, meaning there's a more simple version and a more complex version. And we've looked at Tomlinson's equalizer in terms of maybe it's abstract versus concrete, or maybe it's less steps and more steps, complex versus simple. So there are different ways you can tier it that way, but if you're tiering it only based on product, I don't really consider that a tiered lesson. I consider that differentiation, absolutely, and choice, and there are a lot of good things in doing that, but that's not exactly an example of a tiered lesson. So hopefully that clears up what a tiered lesson is. And then, do tiered lessons need to be tiered in all 3 ways? Absolutely not. I would expect a tiered lesson to be tiered in content, and or process. I mean, sometimes these are going to be overlapping components, so sometimes by tiering content, you're tiering the process as well, but you don't need to do both. Tiering the product could also reflect upon the types of content, so if it inherently overlaps, that's fine, but I don't expect it to be tiered all 3 ways. And then if there is a list or a menu of choices for the products, that again comes back to the idea that I'm not really sure that's demonstrating tiered lessons, because a list and a product choice is demonstrating differentiation, which tiered lessons are a part of, but that's not the only example of differentiation. I do think that when people do differentiate, I think you are already differentiating a lot, and that came up in the discussion boards also. I think you already are differentiating. And you may even be using tiered lessons. But so I would consider, if you're doing different assignments and they are at different levels, so it's the type of assignment that you're giving, not just that it's different, that it's actually encouraging more complex thinking. That counts as a tiered lesson. That's how I see it. If it's just a choice within a topic, that's differentiation, not tiered lessons. And then the final question that's been brought to my attention is that does each lesson need a summative assessment, or can some of them have informal or formative assessments? Absolutely, not every lesson needs a formal assessment, and nor do I think every lesson should actually have a formal assessment. I think you should build in assessments as you go, so you're constantly being aware of where your students are and where you want to take them. But that doesn't necessarily mean you want to give them a formal assessment every day. That doesn't make sense. So I'm not going to mandate how many assessments you need either. I think once again that comes back to the creative license of you as the teacher and the curriculum designer. Then I think one of the questions that also tends to come up is, do I have to videotape the same lesson that is a part of my unit? The answer to that is no. You can videotape a lesson that is not connected with your unit. If you want me to look at it, I've built that into our schedule. When you turn in your individual stage 3, you can turn in an additional lesson plan there, and that lesson can be your video lesson. It doesn't have to be a lesson plan from your curriculum unit. So of course, when you turn in your full curriculum unit, you would leave that lesson out. But if you want me to take a look at it, I'm happy to do that at that time. If you plan on videotaping before that, I'm also happy to take a look at it a little earlier. Just send me an email and explain, because I don't tend to look at the grading things until the day that it's due. And then the expected length of the full lessons. The IDOE full lessons are about 2 full pages long, and I would say that's probably sufficient. I hate giving page lengths, because what I want is to be able to go into your classroom and implement the lesson in the way that you imagined it to be implemented. And so one place that I see that's often missing in lessons is the questions. And I think that's really an important piece of lesson planning, is making sure that you have thought about what are the critical questions that need to be asked in this area, and what types of questions can I ask that goes beyond the very basic knowledge comprehension level questions. Those questions require thought and time, and if you don't think about them ahead of time, you're not going to ask them in class. And so I do expect I expect your lesson plans to have the questions you're going to ask in class in them. With that said, I don't expect there to be a script necessarily, but I do want to see, these are the questions I plan on asking at this point during the lesson. I also want to be able to implement the lesson myself. So if I go into your class, I want to be able to take your plan and understand how to do it the way that you would do it. That's for the full lessons. For your summary lessons, just give me a paragraph, like probably a half a page. What's going to happen? The students are going to be doing some research, they're going to be watching this video, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to conclude with this. So very basic for the summary lessons. So hopefully that gives you, that answers any of your questions. If you have more questions that you want to see on our next video, please feel free to send me emails on those. So in general, when I looked across these stage 2 submissions, I would say that there were 2 major problems, and besides that, I would say most of them were fabulous. Actually, all of them were fabulous. I would just say if you're going to make changes, these are the 2 areas in which most of them, if there were problems, these were where those problems occurred. So first, I would say the biggest problem is I want to be able to see the overarching concept again. I want to know your big ideas and your enduring understandings and your essential questions. I want to see that in this assessment. So just because you see the connection, and honestly, I can see the connection also, if you're not making that connection explicit and explicitly asking the students to consider that, they're not going to make it. There's been several studies, and even if you go back to when problem-based learning originated within the medical sciences field, the medical students were not able to take what they were learning in their first years of medical school, the memorization of the body parts and the different diseases and all of those pieces. They weren't able to take that information and apply it to a real-life setting. So if medical students have a hard time transferring their knowledge and comprehension-based information to real-world settings and to the bigger problems, then how much more challenging is it going to be for elementary students and middle school students to do that? So transferring knowledge is extraordinarily challenging, and it requires deliberate attention by the teacher. So if you have these big ideas like relationships and patterns, and you want to see how this interacts with this, you're going to have to ask, what is the relationship specifically? And so don't be afraid to ask your big questions, because if you don't bring them up in your assessments, you're not going to know whether or not you've addressed that. So that was my first big comment on any of the problems for stage 2. ask the question. If it's a part of your essential questions or if it's a part of your enduring understandings, just ask it. And then the only other issue that I saw some of the time was a lack of detail. And so if you say, I'm going to be using this exit card, it's a 3-2-1 card. I want to know what you're going to be asking on that exit card. I want to see the actual assessments. I want to see the exit card. I want to know. I want to see all the pieces there. And so some of the units that were submitted said, I'm going to use this exit card, but then didn't provide the example. So I do want to see those examples, especially with your individual units. And I will show you that in a moment. So now I'm just going to go through each of the different teams and their stage 2 and talk a little bit about what I saw there. So here's team 1, and they're doing the science fiction unit. I really liked how they changed their big idea. They did a good job revising that. Again, I would try to incorporate the overarching concept into their understandings. If your overarching concept is relationships, then I should somewhere see like the relationship concept being brought here. So they do a great job of giving me a broad overview of perhaps understandings that would be good for their entire course, but I don't see any of those more local understandings for this specific unit. So that's one thing that I would like to see there. And then here we have what evidence will the students what evidence will show that students understand. So here we've got the exit cards, the reading assessment, and Socratic seminar. And I think what I really like about this is that it clearly connects to their enduring understandings. They talked about reading, writing, and listening, and they have one thing for each of those things. So that demonstrates internal consistency with this unit. Their performance task is asking the students to become science fiction writers, which is a really great idea and really puts them in the place of a professional writer. And so they're thinking through that. And then this team did a really great job of including everything that you would want to know. So they have their specific quizzes here. And then one thing, okay, well, it's coming, but they have their quizzes, they have their reading assessments, they talk about the language that's being used, they have answer keys. And here's their writing performance task where they use the raft technique to encourage students to assume a role for a specific audience, and they focus on science fiction because that's part of the unit here. They have a planning page, and one suggestion I had was that you could alter the planning page to meet the needs of different students. So some students may have all of these charts and things to brainstorm these ideas, but some students may not need that. And so you might ask different questions for those different students, provide different scaffolding for them. I liked how they provided a peer review checklist for their students. That's going to encourage purposeful collaboration, which is really exciting. They also have a self-assessment, which I think is also a really great piece to pull in. And so I'm showing you all of this so that if you want to go back and take a look at a really great example, here are some examples for you. And because I copied all of them into one document, something else I should mention, when you submit these, it makes it so much easier for me if everything is in one document, so I can just go right through it. So even on your subsequent individual units, I just like when everything's in one document. And I know the documents are going to become really long and cumbersome, but it makes it a lot easier so that I can just see it all. I don't have to download separate stages, build it myself, because that's what I ended up doing here, which is why some of the formatting is off a little bit. But they did a fabulous job giving me the rubrics in the ideas that they were presenting here, coordinated with their big ideas. Here are the journal prompts they were planning on using, and then here is what I've been looking for through the whole thing. So I got very excited when I saw describe the relationship between humans, technology, and nature. That's it. If that's your big idea that you're trying to thread throughout the unit, ask the question. And so here it is. Wow, yay, fireworks. So that's exciting. Here's another example of the exit card they designed, and then they created a Socratic seminar with guiding questions that are phenomenal questions. They have the rubric, what the objectives are, and how to even track it, and then they have another exit card here, which I do know is the formatting is off, and that is my fault again. So if you want to see a unit that has all of the pieces that are internally consistent with their goals, this first team's it's really quite beautiful. So nice work, guys. Okay, so here is the second team's work, Roderick, Janice, and Mitchell. And their stage 1 looks terrific. I can tell they worked on that. They've made considerable, not considerable, it was good to start with. They made some changes that definitely improved it, and it's ready to go. I'm very happy with that. Their stage 2 also looks pretty good. One thing that one thing that I'm thinking about is just the use of a diorama. And I see where it's really fun. It's a fun thing, but I'm not sure if that's the way to give them, if it makes the most use out of their time. The part that I do like about this is that not only is it a diorama of a biome, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but it's not only just that, it is also a current one and then what it might look like in the future. And I think that is the piece that actually adds in this critical thinking component to this assignment. Without it, I think it's not really prompting a lot of critical thinking, but with that current and future comparison, that's really good. Then they also do give a lot of guidelines, which I think also increases the challenge level a little bit of this assignment. I loved that, the effect of the future environmental change. So that was really cool. They talk about their pre and post tests, their writing prompts, their observations, and then how they're going to assess, which is great. And here's more information about their performance task. And this is where you get to see, hold on, let me scroll down a little bit. Here's the actual thing. It is a really neat assignment. I just keep coming back to the idea, is this the most efficient way for them to demonstrate they know this material? But I think that it is. So I don't want to say that it's not. I would like to do this assignment. It sounds wonderful. So they get to be a little creative in what types of materials they're going to use to build it, and they have to research the plants and animals, and they have to, what I think is missing that should be added is the idea that they have to explicitly address what the relationship is among these organisms. So how do they interact with each other, and what is the impact of one of the organisms on the others? So if something happens to one organism, what happens to the others? And then specifically talking a little bit about the value of biodiversity. Why do we need multiple types of organisms? Why do we need multiple types of organisms even within the same, or multiple types and diverse ideas within the same species and outside of the species? So that's something I would ask explicitly. Just go ahead and do that. Here they have a really great resource list, and one thing that I was thinking about suggesting that might help them in the future is building a squirrel site for their resource list. And here I can show you my squirrel site. So this is my squirrel site. It's just squirrel.com, and you can register yourself and make your own squirrel site. And then you just enter in when you go to, so for example, if I'm on a website, I just click on my bookmarks here, and I click on add to squirrel, and it just automatically adds the site to my squirrel site. And you can see some of my favorite sites, which I think I'll talk about a little later in this course, but you can see some of my favorite sites, but it sort of provides an anthology or a collection of sites, which might make something for Team 2's resources. It might give them a way to organize it, which might be helpful. But this is great. They provide a lot of resources, a lot of different types of resources, and then they have a fact sheet for their students, which talks about consumers, producers, and this word, and other notes. And that's where I would suggest adding the questions they want to know. So the big questions about the interactions and the relationships, ask those explicitly. Make that a part of this assignment. Their rubric looks good. It has plenty of detail. So overall, nice work. I just had those few suggestions and maybe hopefully one idea for organizing your resources. So now we have Team 3, and their Stage 1 looks great. I like their family orientation piece here. And then they've created in stage 2 a couple ways that I think are internally consistent with their objectives. So the students are analyzing their own families, what makes families special. They're going to have a family fair. They're going to discuss traditions and holidays, and then they're going to assume the role of a police officer and what happens when rules are not followed, which I thought was a great idea. And then they did a really great job delineating all of the pieces they wanted to include. In your own individual units, I would actually like to see, this goes back to the specific pieces, so I'd like to see, you say you're using a variety of exit cards, what do those exit cards look like? At least let me see a few of them. I like how they are encouraging the students to be to do self-assessments and reflect upon their growth, so that's great. And they have 3 different performance assessments, which is a lot, but I think they're doable within this time frame. And then once again, just more details. What does the rubric look like? How will you assess student growth with a pre and post assessment? I just don't see the pre and post assessment, so I can't really comment on the pre and post assessment. And if I scroll through, I might be missing it somewhere else, but that's what I see here. So those are just my suggestions, is include a little bit more detail. Actually let us see what the rubric looks like, what the exit cards look like, what the assessment looks like. You have covered all of the pieces and they match your objectives, so I think that's a good sign. So keep up the good work. And then last but not least, we have Team 4. Now, Amber and Katie are the lone 2 team members of this team, so if they happen to want to join your group, please make room for them. But they're on a roll right now, so maybe they're going to stick with each other. I'm just leaving that up to them. So their overarching concept now is communication, which is perfect for this poetry unit. This works out great. And then they do a great job explaining why communication is important, applying it to their enduring understandings and essential questions. For example, how can we use poetry to express our thoughts and feelings? That's a perfect example of communication, like the expression, communication. I see the connection there. Then determining acceptable evidence. Their really neat thing that they have going on here in this performance task is that they're asking the students to come up with, where is it, a poetry portfolio composed of their original work, which is neat because the students are assuming the role of becoming a poet. And then they get to self-assess and they get to create and write a reflective journal between the student and teacher, which is a great idea. I would also be very explicit on how this is connecting to your big ideas. So if you're going to be using poetry for communication, ask the question, how does this poetry help you communicate? Or did this poetry help you communicate? How do you see other poets using poetry to communicate and express their feelings and thoughts? So if you're not asking those questions explicitly, that's going to be my first suggestion. My second suggestion is just, I loved how this is a good thing is they ask students to be self-assessors, which is always good to give students more responsibility to assess the quality and their work in general. And I would also like to see, so then I also noticed here that I don't see a sample exit card or their sample assessment. So it's a smaller group and I totally understand. They both put in work on this, but in your individual units, I want to see the actual pre and post assessment, the actual exit card, the actual rubrics. So they've got a really good start here. Alright, so after reading your discussions this week, I was really encouraged, I think. I think it's great to have a debate within the discussion board, which makes the discussion so much more interesting. So I think, though, one of the things I really wanted to start with, oh, bugger, I printed out your discussion this time, and the name of this post is absent. But one of you wrote that telling us repeatedly to think like an assessor, to be fair, implies we do not do so normally as teachers, and that even though we assess all the time, we do so poorly in one way or another, and that much of what we were taught as educators and experienced as students certainly was not best practice and did not prove our learning. And I think this was an excellent point. Obviously, I didn't write it. I feel like I've learned a lot in this area, so I gained a lot from the text. But when I was a teacher, But I do think that's interesting to think like an assessor, like implying the idea that maybe you don't already think like an assessor. So hopefully you can take it as if you already do these things, then you're already doing them, and it's not insulting. But um, that was really a good point that I hadn't considered before, and I apologize for it if it came across that way. Um, and then Catherine, I actually hold on one second. Okay, so the first post there, that was from Roderick, who was thinking that, telling us to do this implies that we don't already. And then Catherine suggested that the implications you mentioned often felt like attacks, and I had never thought that before. So I'm really happy both Catherine and Roderick pulled that out of the text for us. Um, I would never want to imply that. So please know that from my perspective, I'm providing materials that I think have been beneficial to me as an educator. So I hope that you can evaluate it, and if you feel offended, then I'm just going to feel I feel awful that you feel that way. So hopefully you can learn what you need to learn, and if you already know it, then hopefully um, you can just forgive the tone. So that is that. So I hadn't considered that. So thank you for bringing that up, though. And then I do think that I think the biggest problem here out of all of these is the idea that assessment, um, that thinking like an assessor, if that's offensive, I should say it a different way, if um, designing assessments that are both valid and reliable, if you think that that's going against the drill and kill methods that most schools are propagating, then what do you do about it? So I think that's kind of the big theme that ran throughout all of this discussion is, this sounds great, but we live in this world, and if I don't improve I-STEP scores, then it's Roderick said, it's a $50,000 question for me. So I'm glad he felt comfortable going through his reasoning this week in the discussion board. And I would like to see where there have been studies that talk about authenticity in science labs and reading selections can hinder our performance on the tests that matter. I would like to see the research on that, because there was a study that I recently read that talked a little bit about if you, Amabile was one of the authors on it, but if you encourage students to be critical and creative thinkers, to go into content at more depth, that they actually retain the information longer, and so they're able to make more connections. It scaffolds their understanding. They retain the information longer. So over a long period of time, that's definitely still the way to teach. Even if you just want the knowledge for the test, the critical and creative thinking component, assessing like the way we've been talking about, is from this one study, was more successful than the drill and kill approach. However, if you are looking, and I think Roderick actually says this, like the 2 weeks prior to the I-STEP, absolutely. You're not going to be able to go into depth and make connections that you normally would. And the 2 weeks prior to I-STEP, that is the time for the drill and kill approach. And studies have shown that those 2 weeks, if you drill and kill, then it actually does help improve student scores. But for the rest of the year, that approach is not going to have long-term knowledge retention. And so that's the piece that I really wanted to highlight, that I don't think that they're necessarily, of course, I think we want to build a test that's worth teaching to. And I'm hoping that, I've been talking to some of my friends over at Smarter Balance, and I'm hoping that some of the pieces that we've been wanting so much in an assessment, I hope they're coming. The problem is now Indiana has decided to pull out of Common Core, and I very much doubt they will go with an assessment consortium like Smarter Balance, who's carefully constructed these assessments. But that's a whole different ball of worms, if that's not a phrase. But the other thing is that one of the comments in this is, Roderick writes, we're being inefficient with our time by not preparing them to succeed when it really counts. And I just want to challenge us to think about, when does it really count? I mean, it counts for us what they get on their I-STEP, sure. But, and sure, it sounds like it counts like a lot of money. But I'm pretty sure that if you wanted a lot of money, you wouldn't be a teacher. And also, I think for our students, it's going to count when they have to write a paper for a journal, or when they have to design an invention, or when they have to balance their budget for a business. Or so the things that we're teaching them, for when it counts for our students, it counts in the real world, and it counts as a performance assessment. And so absolutely we want to build in student success with our drill and kill methods. Sure, we want that to be there. I am not debating that that's a necessity in the current educational schema. But I am saying that there is also a place for performance assessments, not only because it helps them to create connections within the content, but it prepares them for what does really count. And I do see how the difference between, as Roderick says, the disconnect between best practices and reality is astonishing and disheartening. And I am sorry. I am sorry for that. Obviously, I can't control everything, although I would like to. But I do think there's a place to be a creative teacher still, and to be a teacher who accomplishes both, who may sacrifice some creativity and some performance assessment, but doesn't let it all go. So that's what I'm hoping, is that there is a balance, and I think that balance is often lost in education. We tend to swing one way or the other, but I think it's possible. And then I really liked how Janice brought up her time at the College of William and Mary at the conference. That was really cool. If you haven't taken a look at her post, you should look at that and take a look at her recommendation there. Let's see. I think, let's see. I just underlined everything. I think a lot of you talked about how important it was to change the assessments for the different students. I liked how one of the questions that was brought up is, should we average the grades together? That's a great question, and one that really requires a lot of careful consideration on the part of the teacher. What do grades actually mean? So I guess in conclusion, I just hope that these chapters and this discussion got you to think a little bit more deeply about assessment. Not that you don't already, and not that you aren't proficient in it already, but hopefully it provided a few questions and guidance for you to consider and adopt what you feel is important. And I look forward to seeing your individual units come back. So next week on Monday, individual stage 2s are due, and then your group project stage 3s are due. So have a great end of the week, and I'll talk to you soon.